All right, welcome in as we start to do some of these live streams here on YouTube, along with some of our other platforms as well. So we'll be recording this both for the podcast, which you can check out obviously on iTunes or Anchor, .fm, Spotify, wherever you get those fulfilled, and then also over on the Sportscaster platform, Sportscaster spelled castr.com/. One Giant Podcast. You can follow us over there for some of the updates in between the podcast episodes. If you have any comments, we'll be keeping this screen up in front of us as well so that we can go ahead and answer any questions and maybe engage in some New York Giants debate. In the meantime, we will fire up our other platform, get live there, and then jump right in with our podcast episode recording, get it on the comments, and we will fire this off. All right. And once again, we welcome you back into another episode of the One Giant Podcast without my co-host, Andy Makowitz, today, giving you a brief update in and around all things New York Football Giants. Obviously, some big news about a free agent signing, but then some other injury notes going on, some speculation around the offensive line as well. But we'll start with the biggest news, the most recent news, and that's officially the Giants reach out and come to terms with Logan Ryan. I believe it's on a 1-year, $7.5 million deal. And obviously, in the wake of losing DeAndre Baker with his off the field issues, you then couple that with having Sam Beal opt out on the season. And you further compound that with the fact that McKinney suffers that injury in training camp as well. Expectations are that he can return later in the season. A similar injury suffered, I'll forget the player who dealt with it, but he came back week 11 of this past year. I think he came back the last 4 or 5 games of last season. That's the expectation for McKinney coming back from that injury. So obviously not great. From a Giants standpoint, to lose the rookie and really was going to play a key part in this defense, you would assume, coming into this season. But turn the page, at least in the short term, and the Giants bring in Logan Ryan. When you look over at the New York Giants depth chart, and this is really what they talked about, where you expect this player to be utilized for Big Blue, and that's going to be in the secondary at that back level. Could see him flex out to the cornerback position as needed, and I really do think that when we talk about Graham and his defensive scheme, it's going to be that mix and match. And if you go back a couple of episodes on the podcast, Andy and I had talked about what was going to be most important for the Giants in terms of going out there in the free agent market and considering what your viable options were going to be to help give more depth at the cornerback position. And I said this is pre the McKinney injury, actually, where I really thought adding another safety to the mix would give you the flexibility to say, maybe we see a stretch here where we want to put, at the time, McKinney down into the box into run support, maybe have him go ahead and come blitzing off the edge there. You think about Peppers and what he can do in that mix and match kind of game. And then even a Julian Love, where do you want to rotate these players around? You know, McKinney, because of his versatility, could have lined up in a bit of that backer role, certainly at certain points as well, pick up a tight end coming off the line of scrimmage there as needed, right? But you deal with that injury. Now you get even thinner. And even though you bring in Ryan, I still think that it's going to be a very fluid situation in terms of blame the other outside spot there across from Bradbury. Now, you may assume that bringing in Logan Ryan means you're going to see him on the outside more often than not. But I think what you want to do is have this flexibility to say, if we can survive or like what we see from a Valentine, maybe we can get by with him on particular down and distances, and then allow a player like Logan Ryan to sit there in the back and then go ahead and assess what's happening in front of him and go where the ball is going, track the quarterback, and certainly help in run support as well as needed. Then you have Darnay Holmes, who's been flashing and showing some good signs in training camp as well. If he can get out there on the outside, now you really, listen, you have young players. The expectations are they're going to take their lumps over the course of the season. But hopefully, between the two of them, one of them starts to rise as you work through the year. But between those two players on the outside, that's your baseline. Now Ryan gives you this flexibility because, again, when you look back at the back end of this defense, losing McKinney, you may like Love as we do, and you may like Peppers as we do, but then beyond them, who else is going to be there? And you really, again, flexibility, being able to switch out personnel based on the situation of the game and just understanding that I don't think it's going to be a one-to-one that Ryan gets brought in and now you set him out there across from Bradbury and say, this is our starting cornerback situation and we'll figure out the safety spot. I think it's just going to be, how do the young players look? Who's coming along for the Giants? And that's going to allow you, that's really where the flexibility is going to come from. If these young players show that they can handle themselves on the outside, now Logan Ryan becomes an even more flexible piece for you. But worst case scenario, the Giants bring in a valuable piece, a contributor there at the outside, a contributor at the secondary level there. So a great piece to have in familiarity with Dave Gettleman. It gives them familiarity with Bradbury as well. So you like to think that there's an opportunity here to have some decent continuity inside of this secondary. Beyond that, though, and by the way, we can also throw this in as Andy and I, we do utilize Pro Football Focus just as a reference point without really wanting to hang our hat on that. You know, at 5'11" and 195, the reason why you expect maybe the former Rutgers Scarlet Knight product to be utilized at safety position, 4.56 speed. So certainly not the fastest in terms of matching up with some of those speed wide receivers at times. Played himself to a 64, nearly 65 Pro Football Focus rating. That's going to be on the higher end of who the Giants had out there on the field last season. And if you want to even go back the year prior, a 71.6 Pro Football Focus rating as well. So you are bringing in consistency. You are bringing in experience. Came out in 2013, so has plenty of experience in the league. Is not going to be overwhelmed or caught off guard by a scheme that gets thrown at him. So hopefully that helps create some stability there in what has unfortunately been, through a multitude of reasons, not just injury, but an area of this team that we thought was going to possibly be a young strength going into the season, certainly has some holes that had to get filled, and they've done so here with this pickup. Other things out of camp, we'll start with the offensive line and really what ends up also being a tip of the cap to a player on the defensive side of the ball. If you go back again and listen to some of the episodes where I've been still high on Lorenzo Carter, I like what he brings to the table for the New York Football Giants. I think that he is a bigger, more physical presence on this defense at the linebacker core, and I would make the case that over his first 2 years, there were stretches where he was being misutilized by the defensive coordinator. And what I mean is setting him out there to have to pick up an assignment in terms of coverage, you're running a risk of him being exposed. He's best utilized in and around the line of scrimmage, best utilized in run support. And then depending on who you're matching up with, you can go ahead and let him pick up a tight end coming off the line of scrimmage, or maybe a running back coming out of the backfield. But you're not going to want to have him taking on the Kelseys of the world or the Kittles of the world, that tight end position. He's going to get burned more often than not. Think back to, not a like for like comparison, but when you think back to an Antonio Pierce, he had so much value for the New York Football Giants, but in pass coverage, there was going to be certainly limitations to what he was able to do for you. So this is about accentuating what he does best, and I think that is playing downhill, getting after the quarterback. That is the way that we come to the performance of Fleming over some of this training camp stretch here, where you had a 4-sack performance by Lorenzo Carter, really beat up on Fleming there a little bit. And this is where the question, certainly, the Giants went ahead, obviously picked up Thomas there in the top of the first round, solidifying the future of the left tackle position. But we also understand that he's going to deal with some early lumps. We had Solder opt out of the season, so you lose at least some veteran presence and depth there. You have Hernandez locked in there still at the guard position. Then it's center. It's great that we went ahead and put Gates into a position to compete for that. We recently also brought Halapio back in to have a workout, dealt with his injuries coming off of having started for us over the last couple of years. Spencer Pulley still in the mix there. Ideally, you like the idea that we extended Nick Gates. He now has 3 years left here with the team on a very friendly contract. If he can claim that starting center position, you go ahead and lock it in and move forward. However, The other concerns are we bring in Lemieux. He's developmental, started at guard at college. We thought maybe gets into the mix at center. If Gates is there competing and you haven't heard anything about Lemieux, while it could just be that you're looking to bring him along and see where he's best going to fit, if you lock Gates in at center, then that's it. I think you have to move forward with it because the relationship between the center and cornerback is crucial for the growth of a young second-year quarterback like Daniel Jones. And if they can build that relationship, then you say, great, let's keep you here. We got you for 3 years at a minimum. And then if things continue to work out, we'll extend you. We'll love having that relationship locked into place. Lemieux can develop and maybe be the heir apparent, if you want to phrase it that way, for Zeitler at the right guard position. And in the meantime, can develop behind these other guys and be in case of emergency, maybe has to come in at a guard position and play some reps along the way. My concern now is, though, Fleming has been a career backup, obviously has connections with Jason Garrett from Dallas. The question here is, though, Matt Peart is a player that you want to see brought along gradually. And I don't think you want to throw him into the fire too early, because even when he was drafted and it was praised that the Giants were able to get him where they did in the draft, it was because the belief is eventually he can be a starting caliber tackle for you, but not right out of the gate. So if Fleming, it's one of two things here. Is Lorenzo Carter taking that big leap forward in year number 3? Is Graham starting to utilize him better in the defensive scheme? And that's the result that you're getting, where Fleming's doing all right, but Carter's taking a big leap forward? Or is Carter somewhere in the middle of that process and Fleming just looks like he's going to be losing a step maybe and could be a potential area of concern for the Giants? If so, for all the positives that they did this offseason in the draft, and we've had our times taking our knocks on Gettleman, but he's put all these young players in position to rebuild this offensive line in front of Daniel Jones and set the team up for success. Do the thing that has not been done, that was not done under Jerry Reese over those last several years. Don't have Daniel Jones go through the same issues that Eli Manning suffered from at the back end of his career, just not having stability in front of him. However, if Fleming's going to struggle, are we going to throw Peart to the wolves here and just have him learn on the fly? And if you do that, how's the impact going to be on Daniel Jones? Is he going to end up taking a few more hits than you maybe want him to, right? As much as we're high on him going to year number 2, remember, had a little bit of an ankle tweak last season. Maybe that was to get Eli Manning that final send-off, but we don't know if he's going to be an Iron Man type of player like Eli Manning was over the course of his career. So we do have to keep an eye on that to understand whether or not we can allow this type of growth on the fly across the offensive line. The other factor here is that by saying if Fleming doesn't pan out and then you're thinking, well, who do we want to put at right tackle, right? Gates had success there in his sample size last season. But if you're pot committed at him at center, then you're losing him at the right tackle spot. And then you wonder, right? Have we diminished the value of creating the best possible group of 5 players on the line? Where would Spencer Pulley be at the center position relative to Gates? What are we winning or losing there in the margins? If you brought back in Jalapeno, I didn't love his performance last year. You might be able to make the case that he was dealing with injury. Would you be better off with Jalapeno at center and letting Gates get out there on the right tackle? Then you even go to Lemieux and say, where would he be in his development? So these are the concerns, at least right now, that you have to wonder about. I'm not going to overreact to the training camp and the practices. Going to have to wait until we get those deep scenarios. And we all know that there are some very difficult defensive matchups coming the way of this offensive unit. And it'll be very interesting to see, right? Week 1 against Pittsburgh will be a challenge right out the gate. And you know that Tomlin's going to dial it up and test this offensive line, test this second-year quarterback, and see if they have made the improvements that we all hope they have over the course of training camp and what has been, unfortunately, a strange offseason. No official preseason games. Going to be harder to figure that out. One of the other notes that we can take away from some of these practices too, Platzgummer got beat up there a little bit in one of the practices, lit up by Downs, I believe, the linebacker on the defensive side, and immediately rushing to his aid was Saquon Barkley. Got into Downs' ear for a minute. Also had Nick Gates step up and come to the defense of the young international running back that we brought in. Hopefully, I think he can find his way onto the practice squad to start the season. Pretty excited about that. But what you do like here, and this goes back to the last conversation that Andy and I had about the Joe Judge approach, right? Everyone's judging him, no pun intended, about, well, if you're a Belichick disciple and then you try to approach it the same way, you just need to be yourself. Don't try to be Bill. But we have to assume that he is being himself and that this is his methodology. And I think as long as you're seeing the response from the team and that the players are buying into it, then there's really nothing to feel negative about here. He's trying to preach that this is a team that's been plagued by penalties year in and year out. And the attention to detail is important. Continuity is important. And then you're seeing the chemistry as well, right? Having Saquon Barkley, and this just goes even a little bit step back and say, having Saquon Barkley there to be a leader and a vocal leader, that's an important thing to see. If Nick Gates is claiming this starting center role, he also needs to be a vocal leader. And we've heard that earlier in the preseason or the offseason here as well about really becoming the alpha male in that room. That's important too, because he needs to be the one in charge of that offensive line. So these are all nice notes. They're not groundbreaking, right? They're not going to make me all of a sudden flip my mind about what my expectations are, but I do like hearing vocal leadership. One of the things that in Eli Manning's tenure, what we became accustomed to was he's a quiet leader, leads by example. And I think there's value there, of course. And showing up every day, right? Putting in the work in the film room, putting in the work on the practice field. That's fantastic. But this is now a new regime and a new organization, and there's a new crop of younger players that have their chance to really put their own voice and their own personality onto this team, and that's what you want to see. And you want to see it come from Barkley. You also want to see, as we heard, that Daniel Jones is taking command inside the huddle. He is breaking the team down at practice. So as long as that's, again, inside of his personality, same thing like we say about Joe Judge, that's what you want to see. A vocal leader who's taking charge and starting to get the team to really rally around him and believe that we are going in the right direction. Remember, if you're Saquon Barkley going into year number 3, this hasn't been a great taste to start your pro career. A lot of losing. Dealt with some injuries of your own, have had some personal highs, but the team has not had a ton of success. So you need to reassure the Sterling Shepards, the Saquon Barkleys, listen, even Darius Slayton, right, coming into year number 2, hoping that chemistry continues to build. These guys need the buy-in that we're going in the right direction here, and it starts with the support of the coaching staff and of the GM and the front office and understanding where we are in the rebuild. And then if it's your franchise quarterback, he needs to be the one that leads this team. So a lot of nice things to come out of there as well. Other than that, when we really look around here, Blake Martinez dealing with a little bit of injury, think it's going to be okay there. Interestingly enough, it does seem like we may get a little bit of a mix up there in terms of the linebacking core and who's going to start alongside of a Blake Martinez. Mayo goes down with that injury. Unfortunately, doesn't look like it's as serious as it could have been, but as it stands right now, you talk about, as we just scroll through some of these here, we know McKinney is going to be out. The torn meniscus in his knee, that's what Mayo suffered from there. So we'll have to wait and see what that's going to look like in terms of his line there as well. And then unfortunately, Platzgummer was also listed out there at the end of, that's going all the way back. So he was back on the field there, obviously for the team. So what's going to happen though, in terms of this linebacker core? I've spoken to what I'd like to see in terms of a player like Carson opportunity. I know that we can talk about the speculation is, listen, late round pick. If he can get out of the practice squad, bully for him. I think that this guy has all the intangibles to make the 53-man roster, even if it's initially going to come in the form of special teams. But I think you're very quickly going to see him get opportunities on the defensive side of the ball to make his impact. And when we look in there right now, remember, added Marcus Golden back in. So he's in there at the weak side. Toa Effa is listed there right now. This is going off of ESPN's depth chart, by the way, on the inside linebacker position along with Martinez. I don't see that being the case. I see it more likely here that Ryan Connolly, if he's not going to be able to claim it, has had a couple little nagging injuries, but you think he's going to be okay. Obviously, coming off of missing an entire year, they're going to take their time with him. I think that the downs underneath this new coordinator here for the Giants has really stepped up over the offseason. And again, if you're a player that's been around the league for a couple of years, your familiarity with systems and schemes can give you the leg up over rookies and young players. Remember, Connolly essentially is a rookie coming into this year. So wouldn't be surprised if you see him jump up there a little bit. And then you get this mixed bag of Fackrell, and you talk about Oshane Ximines is obviously going to be in there in these roles. But the strong side linebacker is penciled in there as Lorenzo Carter. And then behind him, I really want to start to see the likes of a Carter Coughlin get a handful of those reps. Ideally, in a perfect world, what we're going to see is that the team stays healthy. Remember, we're at the end of August here. We are only a little over, it's a week and a half away from real football starting to happen with that Thursday night kickoff. We'll close out on this. Everything seems to have gone well for the NFL. Andy and I had talked about the speculation around the positive tests, the conditions, the protocols, all of those things. Now, it's going to ratchet up a little bit different here when teams start traveling, and we'll have to see how that plays out because we've seen with Major League Baseball, they again suffered more delays and more scheduling getting pushed off here. So the difficulties that they're facing are going to probably at some point rear their head for the NFL. And the question mark is just going to be, how do they handle it? How can they pivot it? And while we maybe would like to hear more on the front end in terms of the NFL's plan of attack, at the end of the day, I think what we have to kind of hang our hat on is that they're at least having these quiet conversations in the background, and there'll be some type of adjustment ready to be made if the New York Giants have some positive tests and they need to delay one of those games. Earlier on, we heard with some of the college football pulling out on their seasons, would the NFL try to capitalize on Saturday football? I think that at least becomes a flexibility position for them if they have any issues with positive tests. But so far, so good for the most part here over the course of the offseason. And when we think about, again, in on the schedule here going into the season, the Giants are going to open that up. Pittsburgh, September 14th, Monday Night Football there. So that's certainly going to be the first big challenge. They'll follow that up on the road against Chicago, where Nick Foles seems to have that leg up in training camp. So a familiar face there at the quarterback position, and away we go into the start of the season. As that kicks off, we will start to take a look at adjusting our schedule. Andy and I will get on closer to what we were doing last year when we kicked off this bad boy and started covering the Giants, as impassioned as we have. We'll start to do those pre and post game coverages in terms of setting you up going into the weekend and then coming out of it with some of our breakdowns, and then probably a midweek update as well, just to fill you in on any news and notes around practice, injuries, etc. That being the case, man, you like the signing of Logan Ryan. You hope that it brings some stability here. We're probably going to have to lean on some of those veterans. And unfortunately, a season that coming into it, as optimistic as I can always find myself being, it's harder and harder when you don't have some of the young talent there. I was excited to see Sam Beal play. I was obviously very excited about getting McKinney in there and mixing him into the fold. That being the case, though, let's see how it looks. The very interesting thing about this is these inter-scrimmage games between the offense and the defense, and the Giants, I think, got in there together with the Jets, or hoping to. That's fine. But even the preseason games, even those handful of reps that you get with the starters out there, they're still important just to have a sense relative to other right now for the Giants. We have our suspicions, we have our concerns, but offensive line, listen, they can come out, and if Thomas looks even solid, understanding the lumps that he's going to deal with as a rookie, if he can come out looking solid, at least in the run game, which is supposed to be where he'll excel initially over the pass protection, probably, Then you have a Mauler in Hernandez next to him. And then if Nick Gates is taking control at that center position, now you're talking about building at least a formidable run attack there. And that can predicate and open up some things for Daniel Jones and for this passing attack. So the question marks still abound. Normally, what we would have done here was go ahead and give you that breakdown. We highlighted Daniel Jones, Andy, and myself saying what we were hoping for him, completion percentage, yardage, touchdowns to interception ratio, fumbles, which we hear he's still working out the kinks on as well. But we will come back in when I get Andy on here with me. We'll do that breakdown around the wide receivers and running backs and where we think their stat lines are going to go. We'll then have just enough time to touch over on the defensive side of the ball, highlight some of the expectations there as well before we kick off the 2020 NFL season. Again, just a mere couple of weeks away, officially as of today, starting today, 2 weeks from kickoff for Big Blue with that Monday night matchup in the Pittsburgh Steelers. Hopefully you enjoyed the check-in here with me speaking into the void. We will, of course, Andy and myself, be back again soon. You can follow us on social media at One Giant Podcast and download, rate, review, and subscribe to the Giant Podcast wherever you get those needs fulfilled. Until the next time, as Andy Makowitz wants you to know, let's go Big Blue. And that'll do it for the recording over on Sportscaster, as well as the recording for our podcast episode. Beyond that, though, please come back over. We'll start to schedule these out a little bit more, try to ramp up our presence here on YouTube, and hopefully start to get some of these questions coming in because we'd like to get more interactive here. As I said, the next episode will feature us breaking down some of our stat lines for the offensive weapons around Daniel Jones. Love to hear people get involved and see what your expectations are for Darius Slayton, for Sterling Shepard, for Golden Tate, for Evan Ingram. And those are all going to be interesting developments that will help to kind of dictate whether or not we can get closer to my loftier expectations of over 4,000 yards. I have Daniel Jones being a top 10 yardage quarterback in the league. I have him being over 30 touchdowns on the season. All those things are predicated on health of Evan Ingram, of Sterling Shepard, right? Even of Saquon Barkley, and the continued development of a player like Darius Slayton, as we hope he takes on that mantle of a true number one wide receiver. That being the case, we appreciate everyone checking in with us, and we will be back on here talking all things New York Football Giants on the One Giant Podcast YouTube channel.